Welcome back to Federal Indian Gaming Law. Today we're going to talk about sports, wagering, horse racing, and the Interstate Horse Racing Act. But before we do that, probably a topic near and dear to everybody right about now is the exam. So I've written the exam. It currently has 8 questions, mix of essay and short answer. So for those of you who've taken an exam with me before, you'll recognize it. Next Tuesday, I'll kind of give you a sample question for the day, and we'll go over a review, a very brief review, and then it'll be open for questions with regard to the entire class. The open issue for the exam right now is timing. How much time do you want to have to complete the exam? The school would like me to keep it to 3 hours from the time of checkout. I think it's a little aggressive, although the test should be easily completed within 3 hours. And I understand the tension here. If you only have it for a short period of time, then you can't waste, a day or two doing it, versus if you only have it for a short period of time and something bad happens, internet connection goes down, whatever, you've got issues. So open for thoughts on this one. Daniela.
I was going to say Morgan just said 12 hours, which would be great, because I was going to say a lot of professors for the 3-hour exams have been giving us like a 4-hour window as like a grace period. I think 12 probably sounds better in the chat, but that's just something that most professors have done. So
I'm willing to be flexible on this. It's up to you.
Oh, okay. Well, I think 12 would be ample time.
Here's a third for 12.
All right. 12 and 12?
12 and 12.
12's general consensus. All right, it's 12 hours. You'll have 12 hours to do it. Please don't spend 12 hours on it. This is not a curved class. You don't have to outrun everybody else. And there's a natural curving that ends up happening, but 20-some years of doing this, or 15, 16 years of doing this, naturally occurs. But all right, so you'll have 12 hours from the time of checkout to turn it in. You should easily be able to do it in 3. That's what it's designed to be. Like I said, it's 8 questions. I'll go over the exam format next Tuesday. On Monday, we have anti-money laundering, and we have a special guest, Abby Ferris, from the San Manuel tribe.
Professor, next Tuesday?
Next Tuesday.
Wednesday.
No, next Tuesday. Because I think next week is the last week of class. Let's just pull it up. Law school calendar. Pull it up, and then I'll show it to everybody. Spring 2022. Right. Because next Tuesday is April 26th, if I'm not mistaken. And I could be. Let's do share.
No, I think you're right, Professor. I think this is us like making up for Martin Luther King Day, President's Day.
Yep. So I don't know if you can see the cursor or not. Final day of instruction is April 26th. And it runs on a Monday schedule.
Oh, okay, this is weird. That's okay.
No class on Wednesday. You're welcome to log in, but I don't think anybody will be here. And that will be review. Come with questions. Get back to PowerPoint here. Hopefully that's helpful. I would strongly encourage you to be here Monday, and also if you could, cameras on when we have guests, if at all possible. I understand if it's not, but as a guest lecturer, just seeing a bunch of names, it's difficult. So getting into sports wagering, I'll go fairly quickly. There's a lot to cover. Sports wagering isn't new. It's been around since ancient times, just like the bikini has. That wasn't new in the 50s. This is a mosaic, I think, found in Sicily, dating back to ancient times. I don't know why the slides are now covering the text. They weren't 5 minutes ago, but so wagering on sporting events, athletic events, in particular racing, was really popular. You know, you can see it in this work of pottery, Greek pottery. Romans were also big on athletic events and horse racing. And at one time, Rome itself had 7 different tracks. Now, with that, you could also bet on racing. So betting on horse racing isn't new, but what you'll notice here is this is like a head-to-head race. This is not a field race. So this is chariot racing, and it was popular enough where somebody made a mosaic out of it. Actually, there are lots and lots of mosaics out of it. Mosaics take a lot of time, effort, money, resources to make. So this was important at the time. And like with other things, the Romans provided us the first known wagering laws on wagering on athletic events and racing. And while in Roman times, other forms of gaming went through periods of prohibition and permissiveness, racing and betting on athletic competitions were always legal, but they were regulated. And as the Roman Empire spread, so did their culture. And this is another mosaic extolling the virtues of horse called polydoxy. So, you know, it's a win or lose, we're gonna love you. And that takes a lot of time, effort, and money to create. This is not, you know, a casual drawing or scribbling. This is somebody that spent a lot of time, effort, and hired people to make a full mosaic about a horse. And it flourishes throughout the Roman world. And as the Roman Empire receded, its culture and its norms stayed with the areas where it had control, even though the empire itself receded. And you see this in the United Kingdom, Britain. So in the Middle Ages, you still had betting on athletic events, contests, and horse racing. And you can see this in tapestries from the Middle Ages. And in fact, even during the Crusades, they had to have special rules about betting and gambling, particularly on racing, and because it was so prevalent. And sports wagering is really, or horse racing is really kind of the foundation for all sports wagering. It was popular, has a long history of being popular, has a long history of being popular as a betting activity, and it had the byproduct of improving blood stock. And don't forget, you know, up until the early 20th century, you know, from ancient times up to the early 20th century, horses were still the primary method of transportation for people, goods. So improving blood stock was always a good thing. And, you know, horse racing was popular in Rome. Britain, or Britannia, was a province of Rome. When the Romans left, the British kept the tradition alive. And horse racing was huge. It was big in Britain. And even the aristocracy and nobility participated in horse racing until it came to an end with this guy. So Nolan Cromwell, an independent Puritan, rose to power, and he felt that horse races were a dangerous assembly, and conducting a race or participating in a race was punishable by the ultimate punishment. But Cromwell doesn't live forever, and guess what comes back as soon as he's gone? Horse racing. even for the nobility. So you had horse racing making a huge return, people betting on horses, very, very popular. And early betting on horse racing was known as match betting. So really kind of head-to-head races. Yeah, Chris, exactly. Cromwell banned a lot of things. But match betting is really head-to-head. So it's a lot like sports bets, right? You just have two horses in the race. You're betting head-to-head. It's match betting. Odds are pretty easy to maintain, not that complex. And of course, wherever the British went, so did their culture, just like the Romans. And this was popular in British colonies, including the Americas. And horse racing was very popular during colonial times here in America. Of course, it was popular in Hong Kong and India and other places the British were. And again, it was still primarily a head-to-head activity. Two horses going at it, bets on one side, bets on the other. And the math is pretty simple and it's pretty easy to maintain that. But sometime in the 1800s, late 1700s, field racing became popular. We have a field of horses racing against each other. Well, that becomes a little more complex. Actually becomes a lot more complex. And it became really difficult for tracks and bookmakers to balance their odds. In fact, during this time with field racing, a lot of tracks had books built in, and they would vacillate between running their own books and then closing the books and letting independent bookies take bets. And why is that? Because it's really hard to create field racing odds and make a profit. You're doing this by hand, you're trying to calculate as time goes on, and it's hard. You can lose a lot of money quickly. And books often did, and bookies often did. Until the late 1800s, when a Catalan inventor came up with the pari-mutuel system of horse racing, or horse race wagering, actually. What this did is it made field racing profitable for tracks. Again, before, if you had a field of 7 horses, you had to have people figuring out the odds, you're posting the odds, you're putting them on a chalkboard, people are taking bets. It's hard to figure out your exposure, in the event of certain outcomes. But pari-mutuel is easier. Pari-mutuel, you basically were constantly calculating how much money was been bet on which horses, putting everything into a pool. And really, it's a bet against from better to better with a bit of a takeout. We'll talk about pari-mutuel again in just a few minutes. But it wasn't popular. Bettors didn't like it because you didn't know what the odds were. Unlike the chalkboard where all the odds were up there and the track just took its chances. With pari-mutuel, the odds wouldn't really be known until post. And it really didn't have any success until the first totalizer board was installed at Arlington Racetrack. Anybody familiar with Arlington? It's a racetrack. It's probably, I don't know if it's still open, but if it is, it won't be open for long because the Chicago Bears just bought it. But Arlington put the first totalizer board in, and pari-mutuel betting takes off. Now, what else happens in the early 1900s, late 1800s? Well, horse racing goes, is king. No question. It's the #1 spectator sport. It's something people are really interested. People bet on it. But in the late 1800s, a new spectator sport pops up. Baseball. And baseball gets popular very, very fast. And people watching baseball like to do what they do when they watch horse races. They like to bet. And so betting on baseball became very, very common. In fact, it was so common that team managers often were boastful about their bets. So this is from the Washington Post in 1894. Uncle Anson, manager of the Chicago Colts, has already started making wagers on the position the Chicago Colts will have in the race for the National League pennant next year. He put up $100 a few days ago that his team would finish higher up in the race than the Pittsburgh Pirates. You know, if you did that today, you know, if the manager of the Chicago Cubs was reportedly putting bets on his team that they'll finish up higher than the Pittsburgh Pirates and the Milwaukee Brewers and whoever else is in their division, that'd be scandalous. You know, you'd have Pete Rose, right? So, but back in 1894, not scandalous at all. In fact, betting in baseball went hand in hand. In fact, there was a term that became part of the English language, or at least the American English language, called hippodroming. Made it to the dictionary. And what is hippodroming? It's conducting a baseball game for the primary purpose of gambling. So you could have the Chicago Cubs and let's say the New York Yankees playing a game. Now this is before before interleague play. But they would put these games together primarily for the purpose of gambling. They didn't count in the standings. The players get paid something other than their contract fee. And it was just put together so there was a betting event. And it was popular. And that popularity continued until 1919. 1919, we get the Chicago White Sox. In 1917, they won the World Series. In 1919, they were expected to do so again. And while the Sox were good, Comiskey was cheap. He had a reputation for being stingy. And what he would do is he'd sign a bunch of really young players to lifetime contracts at low wages. Because when he signed them, you know, they were unknowns. Talent was unknown. And he'd only keep the players that turned out to be talented. And on top of that, he had a clause in these contracts that prohibited them from even negotiating to play for other teams. So players had no bargaining power. They're signed up when they're young. The ones that get good are grossly underpaid. And it becomes a problem. And it becomes a problem because there was an allegation that the White Sox threw the 1919 World Series. So the 1919 World Series occurs. The Sox are the favorite. They win first two games and then go on a cold streak and lost the World Series. And there was speculation that they lost it because players were paid to throw the game. Now, what happened, or at least what we think happened, is there were a number of independent bookmakers on the East Coast that took an inordinate amount of money on the White Sox. And when they tried to lay off that money, those bets to a known figure with ties to organized crime that usually backed those layoff bets, he said no. And so these bookmakers on the East Coast were getting extremely nervous. And so some of them approached the players and agreed to pay them if they threw the World Series. Then they went back to Mr. Rothstein and told him what was going on. At that point, he accepted the layoff bets. And sure enough, the White Sox lost. Now the players claim they never got paid and that they did not take any bribes to throw the game, that like any other baseball series, sometimes you're hot, sometimes you're cold. and the bats went cold at just the wrong time. Evidence was collected, evidence was lost, nobody was convicted, but the damage had been done. And, you know, with the exception of Nevada, most states made sports betting illegal. So Nevada continues to take bets on sports, but we don't do it in the casino environment because sports betting is kind of unseemly. You know, again, back at this time, you know, early 20th century, casinos are either cowboy joints or they're kind of a little bit upscale. And sports books attracted a different clientele. So sports betting was generally outside the casino environment in independent books, or what we call turf clubs, because they also took horse race wagers. And they had names like Little Caesars as opposed to Caesar's Palace, Churchill Downs, the Rose Bowl, but they were primarily race and sports books. Although they were taking race wagers by hand, no pari-mutuel. And other states made pool selling and bookmaking illegal. Pennsylvania's laws here. Florida has a law. California has a law. Just about every other state other than Nevada has a law prohibiting sports betting. Well, in 1990, the state of Oregon decided that they were going to do a sports lottery based on NFL and NBA scores. And they were doing so after Delaware had unsuccessfully done this in the 1970s, the late 1970s. But it caught the eye of a couple of senators, one being Bill Bradley. Anybody remember Bill Bradley? Probably you're all too young.
Yeah, he played in the NBA and had an unsuccessful run for president.
Yes. He was a huge college basketball star, played in the NBA, and he was good in the NBA, was a senator from New Jersey, ran for president unsuccessfully, but he really, really, really hated sports wagering. He thought it corrupted sports. In college, he had been approached a number of times by bookies to throw games or to shave points, and he thought this was as bad could get. And he sponsored something called the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act. Now, what the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act did is it made it unlawful for any government entity to sponsor, operate, advertise, promote, license, by law or compact, or any person to operate, advertise, or promote. You've seen this language before. Basically, it prohibited governments, state and tribal governments, from authorizing or allowing sports wagering, with 3 exemptions. The first exemption was for state lotteries that had actually run the lottery between 1975 and the enactment of this law. So basically exempted Delaware and Oregon from these prohibitions in the lottery setting, and possibly Montana. I think Montana may have run a state lottery product based on sports. Then there was an exemption for any state that had run, that had commercial sports betting that was conducted pursuant to regulations and that were enforced between sometime in the 80s and 1989. And then there was a third exemption for any jurisdiction that has had 10 years of regulated casino gambling to enact sports wagering legislation within 1 year of enactment of PASPA, provided that the activity was limited to sports wagering within a casino environment. Now, in 1992, there's only one jurisdiction other than Nevada that had regulated casino wagering for 10 years. Anybody take a guess? It's New Jersey. So New Jersey got an exemption. But they had to get their act together and authorize sports wagering and enact regulations and conduct the activity within 1 year of enactment of PASPA in 1992. And I don't know if anybody's ever worked on legislation before, but it's a lot harder to get legislation on than it is to kill it. And all the opponents of sports wagering in New Jersey had to do was prolong the legislative process for 12 months. Now, this had broad support in New Jersey to take advantage of this exemption. And it was a small minority that didn't want it. But the way New Jersey's legislature works, anytime you have an amendment, it has to go back through different committees. And that's what they did. They just kept changing it until it died through process, essentially. Kept getting sent back to the finance committee and then the judicial committee, and then make a change. And now it's got to go back. And so New Jersey didn't qualify for its exemption. Well, 20 years later, New Jersey decides, you know what? We should be able to do anything Nevada does. And we want sports wagering. They hold a referendum. And the referendum is strongly in favor of sports wagering. And so they're going to enact laws to allow sports wagering. And the NFL, of course, is not happy with this. So the governor of New Jersey basically comes to an agreement with the NFL that he won't do anything for at least a couple of years. And by the way, he probably won't be in office and wasn't in office later. And New Jersey gets a Super Bowl. Anybody know how many cold weather open stadium Super Bowls we've had?
It's got to be like under 5.
How about one? There's been one, and that was the one. Now, I think it was Governor Corzine. After he leaves office, Governor Christie picks up the mantle again, and the legislature enacts a law to permit sports wagering. And under PASPA, leagues have a right of action against governments to enforce this. And they did so in 2008 when 2009 when Delaware brought back its lottery. They sued, and they were able to keep the Delaware lottery limited to doing what it did in the 70s, which is 3-team parlays. And they sued the state of New Jersey, and they won. And it went up to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, and they won again. And then they asked for a rehearing, and they won again. And the state asked for cert, and the Supreme Court denied. Well, so New Jersey, no sports wagering, but it was deemed to violate PASPA on a pretty narrow ground. And what the Attorney General of New Jersey said is, okay, so we can't regulate sports wagering under PASPA, but it doesn't say we can't decriminalize it in certain locations, and we're decriminalizing it within a casino environment. And the law we passed had a severance clause, and so we're going to sever that regulation language, and you're back on. And of course, the NFL sues. They won in federal district court. They won at the Second Circuit. They won on a rehearing at the Second Circuit. But this time, the Supreme Court granted cert to the state. And what the Supreme Court said is PASPA is unconstitutional. And why is it unconstitutional? Because the federal government is telling other governments what they can and can't do when the federal government doesn't actually have a policy on this subject itself. Federal government doesn't make sports wagering legal or illegal. And it can't force states to do something it doesn't have a policy for. That's commandeering state government. That's something that's not allowed under the Constitution. Therefore, PASPA dies. And of course, the next day, New Jersey says, woo, we're going to be on for football season. This is back in May of 2018. And New Jersey quickly legalizes. Delaware does as well, but through its lottery. something they planned on doing in 2008, but were told they couldn't. And today, sports wagering is available in most of the United States. So where Nevada had essentially a monopoly on broad-based sports wagering up until 2018, it no longer does. And you can see all these different states where sports wagering is legal and regulated. You'll see like North Carolina and New Mexico is tribal only. That's why it's light green. Tribal only and on tribal land only. Nebraska, Ohio, and Maryland have enabling legislation, but they haven't started regulated sports wagering yet. Florida entered a compact in with the Seminoles to allow sports wagering in Florida. That is being challenged as unconstitutional in Florida. I expect that you'll see a challenge in New York at some point in time as well, because New York has a constitutional prohibition on the expansion of gambling, and I don't believe they did a state constitution amendment before authorizing sports wagering in the legislature. Daniela.
I'm gonna ask, New York already had a issue with sports wagering before too, right? With like DraftKings and FanDuel.
Yep, they had it with Daily Fantasy. And the issue there was brought by some activists that are very anti-gambling. And what the activists were saying is the legislature can't just redefine things to not be gambling when they are. The state constitution prohibits an expansion of gambling. To get around it, the New York legislature said, well, daily fantasy is a skill game and we can regulate skill games without violating the Constitution. So that's what we're going to do. And the activists won at the first two levels of litigation. They lost at the highest court, only, I want to say last month. And it was a split decision. And the majority said, we have an obligation to if we can find a law to be constitutional, we have an obligation to do so. Here, plaintiffs have said that the legislature redefined a gambling activity to not be gambling. The defense for the state was, hey, there are at least 8 states that have said that daily fantasy is a game of skill. Therefore, we, the legislature, deeming it to be a game of skill is not unreasonable. If we're not unreasonable in our redefining of fantasy sports as skill, then the law should be upheld. And that's what the majority at the highest court in New York said. They agreed with that. The dissenters said, no. If you're allowed, if the legislature is allowed to redefine anything the way it wants to avoid the Constitution has no meaning. But that was the minority opinion. The issue for sports wagering hasn't been raised yet, but I don't think it has the same path forward. So I don't think the legislature can say, well, sports wagering is a skill game, and lots of other states have said so, because no other states have said so. It's just flat out bookmaking. So while sports wagering has become popular or legal and regulated in most of the United States in the last 4 years, 3 years, 3.5 years, the federal laws still are in place. You still have the Federal Wire Act. Don't forget about the Federal Wire Act. William Hill is in a bunch of, Caesars, in a bunch of these jurisdictions, but they still can't take bets across state lines. They might have a deal in Arizona with a tribe there. They might have operations in Colorado, Illinois, New Jersey, but they can't take bets across state lines, so they can't consolidate their operations. And you still have the Illegal Gambling Business Act. You can't take bets from states where this is illegal. So let's go quickly through this. So again, from the federal law standpoint, don't forget those 2 laws. The fall of PASPA did not make sports wagering legal. all it did was it said that the federal government can't prohibit states from making it legal. Big difference. Horse racing. We talked about this a little bit. Initially, horse racing was a head-to-head betting activity. So you'd have two horses in a match, and people would bet on them. And relatively easy. Over time, parimutuel wagering comes into play, and parimutuel wagering really saves tracks. It saved them a lot back in the early 20th century because tracks were closing. It was difficult for tracks to operate. And again, you're starting to see the mechanization of America back in the early 20th century. And who's involved? Well, you have horse owners, trainers, you got the track, the jockeys, the bettors. They all have an interest in horse racing. So how does parimutuel actually work? Well, it works by creating a pool or a series of pools. And everybody that bets, their money goes into the pool. So you bet on a horse, your money goes into the pool. The winners, the people that bet on the winning horse, get a portion of that pool based in proportion to the size of their wagers. But they don't get the whole pool. So, anybody remember that, what's the song, Camptown Races? Bet my money on the bobtail nag, hope somebody bets on the bay. You want, as a parimutuel bettor, you want everybody to bet against the horse you're betting on, because it means that you're going to take a bigger chunk of that pool as your prize. Now, this also means that odds fluctuate right up until post, and you don't know what your return is going to be if your wager is correct until post. But the beauty of parimutuel wagering for the track is this thing called a takeout. So you get this big pool of money with all the bets in it, all the money you've taken in, and a slice of that gets taken out as the takeout. And the takeout is the profit for the track and those involved in the track. And the beauty for the track is you never lose. You're not betting against the bettors like you are with match betting or sports betting. I mean, if you placed a bet today that the Buccaneers are going to win the Super Bowl in 2023, and you win your bet, who are you winning the money from? So you walk down to LVH.
The sports book.
The book. The book is out the money. You go bet on, when betting opens up for the Kentucky Derby, you go bet on a horse at the Kentucky Derby down at Caesars, and you win your race, you win that bet. Is Caesars out any money? No, they're not. Because what's going to happen is they're going to pay you, so they're out money temporarily, but then they're going to true up with the track, and the track's going to reimburse them for their losses, less the takeout. So normally I would have you describe parimutuel wagering, but we'll skip that. It's really betting. I mean, the word itself is French for betting amongst ourselves, parimutuel, amongst ourselves. So it's really bettors versus bettors. And again, it's put in the pool. The pool is divided among the winners, and it's divided among the winners based upon the size of your wager and how much you put into the pool. So, and again, those betting odds change. We talked about the takeout already. So the takeout is the portion of the pool that gets taken out to pay the track and the taxes and everything else. What is an OTB? Anybody know? Courtney.
It's an off-track bet. So instead of going to the track and betting there, it's like going to a casino in Las Vegas, and they'll be simulcasting the races, and you can bet.
Exactly. It's an off-track betting facility. Now, we'll talk about OTBs in just a minute. Anybody know what commingling is? Commingling is when you merge the bets from multiple locations into a single pool. So we'll talk about this in just a bit. Breakage. You familiar with breakage? That's the money that, you know, the odds never kind of work out directly. There's always a little left over. That's the breakage. You know, the stuff right at the penny or right at the nickel. Track fees. Track fees are what they sound like. They're the fees that the track gets from the takeout. Totalizer. You know what a totalizer is? Well, something's got to keep track of all these wagers, right? Because you got to constantly recalculate the odds. You know, if the Kentucky Derby is going on in Churchill Downs in Louisville, Kentucky, and you're commingling with all the off-track books around the nation into the pools in Kentucky, and somebody in Nevada puts $20 million bet down on that race, that's going to alter the odds for everybody. Well, you need a system or a set of systems in the middle to recalculate and distribute those new odds as the bets are coming in. And that's what the totalizer does. And disseminators, what do disseminators do? Well, they disseminate all that information. Oh, Courtney, go ahead.
No,
Okay, sorry. So again, you know, when it's at the track and you're betting, pretty easy. You have this totalizer system at the track. It keeps track of the pools. It keeps track of each wager that's placed. And, you know, life's good. Now, multiple tracks use the same totalizer systems. There's only about 4 of them. So over time, tracks realized, hey, we're all using the same system here. Maybe we could allow betting on races at other tracks at our track, right? Because you only have so many races that go on at a track in a particular day or particular month. And so the tracks started to get together and say, you know what? We could start taking races on other tracks and we can kind of communicate with one another. But it's really a track to track to track communication. And at some point, somebody realizes, you know what? We just put somebody in the middle, a major totalizer in the middle. It makes it a lot easier to take bets on other races. So you could go down to Arlington and put a bet down on the Kentucky Derby. Or, you know, you could be at Santa Anita and maybe Del Mar's running at the same time or nearly the same time. You could place bets down on races at Del Mar as well. And this system works pretty good. Well, up pops the OTBs. And initially, the OTBs are outside the system. They're not contributing to the pools. If you're not contributing to the pools, you're not funding the takeout. If you're not funding the takeout, the tracks aren't getting any money or getting very little because maybe they'll get simulcast fees. And so the tracks see this as a threat. You have all these third parties taking bets on our races, and we're not getting any money for it. And this is the way Nevada worked right up until the 90s. And so the tracks and the horsemen run to Congress and say, we want this to be illegal. We want off-track betting to go away. It's taking away from attendance at the tracks, and we make money on food and beverage and parking and everything else. And they're taking bets on our product and we're not getting a cut. And tracks are struggling. We can't compete with this. And so they go to Congress to make off-track betting illegal. But somewhere during the process, the tracks realize, hey, you know what? Maybe if we brought him into the fold, instead of shutting him down, we can make some money on this. So that focus changed from prohibiting off-track betting to a system of consents and revenue sharing. So for the tracks, this becomes kind of like found money. We're going to get these off-track bets, off-track betting facilities to contribute to our pools. Great. The bigger the pool, the bigger the takeout. The bigger the pie, the bigger that percentage is for us, or the more money that percentage represents for us. And it does change. And the off-track betting facilities, which were popular, particularly in Illinois and New York, are all for it. They don't want to be made illegal. Of course, Nevada doesn't want to be made illegal either. And you get the Interstate Horse Racing Act. And an off-track wager means a legal wager placed or accepted in one state with respect to the outcome of horse races taking place in another state. It includes parimutuel wagers, where lawful, in each state involved, placed or transmitted by an individual state via telephone or other electronic media, and accepted by an off-track betting system in the same or another state, as well as any combination. So this is a big, big change, right? Because not only is off-track betting legal, but now, at least under the Interstate Horse Racing Act, placing bets from one state to another state, as long as it's legal under state law, is also legal. And again, for the tracks, this is great. Anything that builds pools is great. More money in the pool, the percentage that we take out means more money. You know, if we're taking 18% of a $1 million pool, great. But if we're taking 18% of a $2 million pool, twice as good. But there are some limitations. One, you can't take an off-track bet except as provided by the chapter. So if you're violating other state laws, no dice. And a lot of states have what they call enclosure laws, where you can only place a bet on a race in that state in an enclosed track facility. Now, why is that? Because the tracks want people going to tracks. They don't want people staying at home and betting from home. And the other thing is that system of consents. You need the consent of the Host Racing Association, the Host Racing Commission, the Off-Track Racing Commission as a prerequisite for the OTB to take bets on that race. So, you need the approval of tracks. If you're an OTB, you need the approval of a track within 60 miles if you're in the same state. So you can't become an OTB and start taking bets unless the local track says okay. However, if you don't have a track within 60 miles in your state, then it's the closest operating track in an adjoining state. Now, this leads to some interesting problems. So what if you're in a state and you're an OTB and the closest track in your state is 65 miles away and the closest one in an adjoining state is 300 miles away? Which approval do you need? Well, you need the one from the state adjoining you, the track that's actually farther away. Crazy outcome. But what does consent really mean? Courtney.
Oh, I wasn't going to say money. I was just going to say, permission to show their races. But yeah, that makes sense that they want their pay.
Exactly. That consent is going to come with a price. Just like the consent of the track, the racing association, the racing commission. It's all about money. So after the Interstate Horse Racing Act passes, what you end up with a system sort of like this. You have multiple state-based or regional-based major totalizers. You have smaller totalizers at tracks. All these totalizers speak the same language. It's called IT, Intertrack. I think it's ITSP, Intertrack System Protocol. And really, you've got just a handful of totalizer operators or creators. You've got AutoTote, which used to be part of Scientific Games, which is now part of a European operator. I can't remember. I want to say Sporting Bet, but I could be wrong. William Hill did try to buy it. You've got AmTote. AmTote's probably the largest in the United States right now. It's run by the Stronach Group. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Stronach. Monarch Tracks. Interesting guy. Austrian engineer. Anybody ever hear of Magna? If you're into cars, they build like the Toyota Supra for Toyota in Austria. That's all Stronach. So you got AutoTote, which is Stronach, also has a bunch of tracks under the Monarch brand. There's United Tote, which was owned by IGT. I can't remember who owns it now. I think Churchill Downs, they own it. And then there's an offshoot called LBDC. LBDC is the totalizer here in Nevada. They are the only one licensed to be a totalizer or provide those services here. So, but they all these systems basically speak the same language. They have same protocols, and it allows for betting on races anywhere with anybody that's connected to the system. Which brings us to the Turfway opinion. Anybody read the Turfway opinion? So at Turfway, the contract between Turfway and the Horsemen is expiring. Actually, it does expire. Horsemen want a bigger portion of the purse, and they're refusing to consent. And so Turfway does an end around the Horsemen's Association. It goes directly to the horse owners. And they do this by inserting language into an entry form for racing. And of course, the Horsemen's Association sues them. And they seek to enjoin Turfway from allowing interstate racing, interstate wagering on those races. And then Turfway counters with an antitrust defense saying, wait, the IHRA is unconstitutional because there's only one Horsemen's Association at each track. They have monopoly power over this, and it's an unlawful restraint on competition. Because there are some members of the Horsemen's Association, owners, that are willing to provide racing and agree to our standard terms, and there are others that aren't. And those that aren't should just go find somewhere else to race. And so it goes to court. And at the district court, at least, the district court found that the Interstate Horse Racing Act to be an invalid restriction on commercial speech and agreed that it was unconstitutional because it's vague and irrational. What they argued is that that simulcast is commercial speech, and it's like an implied advertisement. So, of course, the Horsemen's Association appeals, and at the appellate court, simulcasting is not commercial speech. It is simulcasting a race. The act doesn't regulate commercial speech. No. Is the act unconstitutionally vague? Well, they agree that it is not precise. But because it covers a very narrow subject matter, you don't have to be strictly precise, and you can use a less strict vagueness test. And using that test, it's not unconstitutionally vague. You know, the idea was behind these consents was to negotiate. That you negotiate with the Horsemen's Association, you negotiate with the track, you negotiate with the trainers, you negotiate with everybody. And what's at stake is revenue for everybody. So if you can't come to an agreement, then you all lose. And if you come to an agreement, then you all win. And that's the way the act was designed, and that's the way that it works. So is it unconstitutionally vague? No. It advanced the Congress's legitimate federal interest to allow the groups that control racing to come to an agreement to take that additional money that off-track betting provides. And rather than, you know, putting it hard and fast, you get X, you get Y, you get Z, the idea is that everybody has to negotiate. They all have power in this negotiation, and therefore that's rational, that's fine, and the Interstate Horse Racing Act is not unconstitutional. But let's turn to the Department of Justice. What does the Department of Justice think? Well, on a number of occasions, the Department of Justice has said the Interstate Horse Racing Act does not allow for cross-border wagering. The Federal Wire Act is still in place. The Interstate Horse Racing Act did not provide an exemption under the Wire Act, and therefore it's illegal. And it still views as the existing laws as prohibiting this conduct. So let's take a look at the Wire Act and the Interstate Horse Racing Act. And you can see there's a difference there. But let's go back to probably the third class. What is a bet? Remember what a bet is? Sort of that agreement, right, between the bettor and whoever's accepting the bet. If you ran down to Caesars to place a bet on the Kentucky Derby, which you can't do yet, but if you did and you won, who would you expect to pay you? Courtney.
Caesars.
Yeah. That bet is an agreement. That agreement is between you and Caesars. Now, Caesars shouldn't be out any money if they pay the bet, because why?
I think they get a portion of the take from the track.
Yeah, what ends up happening is at different periods, tracks and off-track betting facilities true up. So if Caesars had more losers or more bettors that won, meaning losing bets for Caesars, then they took in winning bets for the house, the track would send Caesars money to cover. And vice versa. If the track, or if Caesars took in more house wins than losses, so they didn't have a single bettor that placed a winning wager, unlikely, then Caesars would be sending money to the track. Those pools are all essentially virtual. When you bet at Caesars, that amount gets calculated as part of the pool at Churchill Downs for the Kentucky Derby. But the money's not actually transmitted there. The bet's not transmitted there. The bet stays between Caesars and the bettor. And then maybe a couple weeks later, everything gets trued up, and the totalizer system figures out how much money goes in each direction. So some OTBs will be sending the track money, some OTBs will be getting money from the tracks. It all shakes out in the end. So in that, knowing that when you place your bet, it's a bet placed with Caesars here, our bet's actually crossing state lines. The argument is that they're not. Now, that's for going down to the OTB or betting with an OTB in your own state. Now, currently, there are off-track betting facilities that will take bets over the telephone and over the internet if you're in a state that allows it. And Nevada is one of those states. We will allow bettors from other states to place wagers on racing in Nevada from the other state because the Interstate Horse Racing Act permits it. Do we do it? Not really, but we don't do it for other reasons. Usually states that allow this will only allow it with states that offer reciprocal cross-border wagering. So California and New York and Oregon, fine. You get on Twin Spires, which is Churchill Downs online horse racing betting site. You can get on it in California. It's based actually in Oregon. And you can place bets in Oregon from California and vice versa. If you were in Oregon, you could place a bet at a track in California from Oregon under the exemption here in the Interstate Horse Racing Act. Now that would still, in the DOJ's view, violate the Federal Wire Act. But what we do here in Nevada wouldn't. There is a fair amount of technological innovation going on in horse racing right now. We'll skip over that. Instant racing is pretty big. The other thing to know is in Nevada, we have a unique system here for interstate horse racing. The totalizer has to be licensed. Currently, there is one licensee. That's LVDC, Las Vegas Dissemination Corporation or company. The state of Nevada was late to the pari-mutuel wagering world. So we used to take what were called handbook wagers, which is just like taking a bet on a football game or soccer game or hockey game or basketball game, in that the house is at risk if the player wins. So right up until the late 80s, early 90s, that's how it worked in Nevada. Even though the Interstate Horse Racing Act would let us participate in the pools, our bookmakers decided, you know what? We don't want to participate in the pools. We're doing just fine the way we are. We're making money. We don't have to share with the track. We like this. And we can offer track odds. And they did. But it comes with risk. So in the late, I think it was 89, I could be wrong on the date, we had 5 books that decided they would field trial pari-mutuel racing and see if it worked here in Nevada. But there was a fear. And the fear was, well, if we have to go negotiate rates with a track, we're going to get killed because they hate us. Because we've been taking bets on their races without giving them a nickel, other than simulcast fees. They're not going to like us very much, and we're going to get a bad deal. So what the Nevada Gaming Commission did is it let them negotiate as a group. So now instead of negotiating 1-to-1 to 1-to-1, we're going to negotiate as 5-to-1. So we're going to negotiate as a group, and it worked. And Nevada got great rates, excellent rates. And what I mean by rates is out of that takeout, a portion of that takeout goes back to the track for track fees. The rest of it stays with the bookmaker that placed the wager. So, on a win place show bet, what does average take out? Roughly 18%. So 18 cents on the dollar gets taken out. We were keeping 14 and sending 4 back to the track. That's pretty good. Field trial worked great. And then we codified that rate committee. So all books negotiate as one, which means that everybody gets the same deal. Now, when Nevada started this, we moved up to being the largest OTB location in the nation. And we quickly ran up to about $1 billion in handle, a little over. And we had great negotiating power. Because again, everybody negotiates as one. And the only group allowed to negotiate with tracks and totalizers is that pari-mutuel racing committee. Let me pull this up. I thought we were going to go a little bit longer than we did because we have a lot of material. There's 464. Up if I could type. Pull this up. Zoom it up. Switch the focus. So NRS 464 is our pari-mutuel law. And here's the off-track pari-mutuel wagering committee. Once the wagering committee is formed by the commission and it's made up of book operators, they are the only ones allowed to negotiate agreements regarding pari-mutuel wagering. Now, what else happens is because Nevada is late to the party, in order to build market share quickly, Nevada invents something called the rebate. Anybody know what a rebate is? Rebate's giving money back to the bettors that lose. So we invent the rebate. The rebate is successful. And the next thing you know, huge bettors in California, big horse race bettors, aren't betting in California anymore. They're coming to Nevada to bet. Anybody think of who might be upset with that? Courtney.
California as a state because they're losing out on revenue and also like the racetracks.
Yeah, the racetracks in California are none too pleased because if the bet gets taken on their race in Nevada, they get 4 cents on the penny. If it gets placed in California, they get 18 cents on the penny, 4 cents on the dollar in Nevada, 18 cents on the dollar in California. That's a huge difference. So California threatened to cut us off, and so did New York, unless we stopped rebating. And so we did. And we codified that there's no rebate. No rebating allowed in Nevada anymore. Meanwhile, California decided, you know what, that rebating thing worked pretty well for Nevada. We should be doing that. And so did NYRA in New York. And every other track in the nation did. And currently, I think we're probably not going to crack 200 million in handle here, where we used to be over $1 billion. And part of that is because we are the most expensive jurisdiction to place a bet on horse racing in. We are purely retail. No discounts for anybody. And the graph has been like that. Now, the other issue we have are taking bets on foreign tracks because the rate committee represents every book in Nevada. If you have a race, I don't know, let's use the Middle East or Asia, where they tax the takeout, and you know our books can't keep 14 cents on the dollar for those, no deal gets done. While it'd be great for strip casinos, especially if it's like Chinese tracks, is it all that great for, I don't know, Dini's Lucky Club up in Yerington? Probably not. And there's a fear that if you're willing to take less from these foreign tracks, then the domestic tracks are going to want you to take less as well. But so Nevada's in an odd spot. Nevada has been losing revenue on horse racing. Let's just take a look at Nevada. Let's see. Quarterly statistics. Let's look. We'll have somewhere here we should have race. Licenses enforced. I'm looking at the wrong report. The numbers from Nevada are dismal. We're truly dismal. Where's revenue? Monthly revenue report. Here we go. Let's get February. Race book. Last 12 months. It's not a huge number. That's a really small number and getting smaller. So it wouldn't surprise me if at some point in time we did away with our system, because right now we're just not competitive. Now, part of that also has to do with the fact that we charge 6.75% on the takeout for taxes. I think our tax rate on that has to diminish. We're going to grow that business, but that's racing in a nutshell. Open up for questions on sports and race, the exam, anything. Again, money and money laundering. We have a guest speaker, Daniela. Question?
I don't have a question. I do have an announcement, if you don't mind me making it.
Sure.
Okay. If anyone in class is interested, we will have a candidate forum this evening at 5:15 for the Student Bar Association elections. I'm running for full-time vice president. So I just wanted to share that.
Good luck. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Other questions? Courtney.
It's not really a question, more just like a comment, but we talked earlier in class about how baseball came along, and after the World Series, every jurisdiction basically banned sports wagering, but horse racing was either not banned or banned for only a short amount of time, just because I think people just loved horse racing. It was ingrained in culture, but also people viewed, or lawmakers viewed, the pari-mutuel system as like a more like not gambling basically, or like a more fair way to gamble. So I just thought it was interesting that even though sports wagering's been banned, horse racing never really was.
Yeah, horse racing wasn't. Now, a lot of tracks went out of business in the early 20th century, but it was just, interest declined. We had too many tracks.